In today's episode, we are going to be discussing the Wells Fargo personal credit line freeze, what this means for you, what this means for the money in your bank account. We're also going to be talking about some little known things that are happening at the central financial elite power structures. That's the Bank of International Settlements, and what they've been talking about to get complete power and control over your money and what this means for you. So my name is Jake Ducey. Thanks for watching today's episode. We are joined by Mark Gonzalez. Mark is the first person I ever bought my gold and silver bullion from. He's become one of my best friends, and he works for First National Bullion. And so I've heard from many people as I've had Mark on the channel, they've been reaching out to Mark, talking to Mark directly. So for your gold bullion, silver bullion needs to discuss what's happening, how it affects your money, make sure you give Mark a call right there down below. I'll link the First National Bullion website and the number to call where you can speak with Mark directly for your gold and silver bullion needs. First time Mark and I ever met was on a simple call for me looking for some bullion, and we become great friends. So always grateful for that. So make sure you hit the like button on this video to send it out in the YouTube universe so more people see it. Give us a comment right there down below for the good old YouTube algorithm. And Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Jake. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing good. So we've had a lot of interesting happenings. Now, many people watching this video have now heard about the Wells Fargo situation. So I want you to summarize it and your own opinion on what this means to the broader macro lens for the financial system that you've been painting for us the last few times you've been on the show.
Very simply, well, it's not good. Banks lend to increase the money supply, and that's essentially going out on margin. And when they start to pull it back, that means that they're fearful of what comes. You saw a pullback in lending back in the Great Depression, forcing the markets to collapse. You saw it also in 2008, and now you're starting to see it again. But we're not in a Lehman Brothers type situation. So everything's based on a fractional reserve system. The more credit that is out there, that essentially becomes deposit or credit into the banking system, which gets lent fractionally even further in the system. So when you're pulling it in, essentially you're taking money out of the system. And the entire debt-based structure that we have is essentially a Ponzi scheme. It's a borrow Peter to pay Paul. And when you see banks starting to tighten up, and Wells Fargo isn't even the only one, Chase is talking about raising cash. They'll probably start reducing lending soon. When you see that happening, say you pull $1 billion out of the market, you're not just pulling $1 billion out of the market from lending, you could be pulling out 10 times that. So it's a pretty big deal that people need to be aware of. If you remember back in 2008, when everything went to shit, credit lines were cut, credit cards were frozen, equity lines of houses were frozen because the banks just simply didn't want to take the risk. That happened after Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers. Well, here we are, supposedly on a recovery path from this pandemic. And you're starting to see Wells Fargo, one of the biggest banks out there, cut all personal credit lines. So that's bad news, especially for those that need this credit line or have been using this credit line due to displacement of a job in this pandemic. Well, they're screwed. So again, the banks are playing their hand. And since they have they know more than we do. They create the money. If you see them being scared, then I think everybody should be, terrified, personally.
I wonder if it has anything to do with them trying to quell inflation a little bit. Obviously we're now starting to see inflation rising and rising. We've even had the Fed change their tune about their conversation with regards to inflation. We've had Biden administration with their $3.5 trillion infrastructure plan, which is just crazy to read. I mean, that's a big number, 3.5 trillion.
That's not even the only one. There's more than that. I mean, they've already done stimulus. It didn't mean to cut you off. You gonna keep going?
Nope. Tell me,
Okay.
tell me
All right.
what's
So,
happening with money printing and inflation. That's our
well,
next theme.
their entire goal, the entire Federal Reserve system on a debt-based structure of the dollar in the world follows the same system. Whether you're in Europe, euros, Russia, China, it doesn't matter. The entire world's on a debt-based system. So the name of the game is inflation. When you hear talks about trying to calm or cool or inflation being temporary, transitory, that's a lie. The business model is based on inflation.
Why?
Well, because here's how it works, and this is where Wells Fargo is kind of a big deal. Um, every dollar that's created is loaned into existence, but you borrow a dollar, but you owe $1.50 because you have to pay the interest. Interest is never made, so debt is always going to grow. The debt base of what is owed is always going to be larger than that of a currency or monetary base to pay for it. So you have to borrow or create enough credit to create the currency. You got to create enough debt to create the currency every year over year to cover the previous year's principal and interest. And that's just to hit a baseline of zero, right? It just eventually can't be done indefinitely. So to pull back, Wells Fargo to pull back, in my eyes, their credit lines, I don't see that as trying to slow down inflation. Inflation's already here. You can see that in asset prices and grocery bills. What they're doing is they're mitigating their risk of what they have out there, because if things go bad and they have all these credit lines out there, personal credit lines, say it's a 50,000, 100,000, even a 10,000 credit line, and someone's living off of that because they were displaced or damaged, how are they going to pay it back? Right? So it's easier just to say, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to take it out of the system. So to me, this is the beginning of probably a systematic takedown of financial markets. It's exactly what happened going into the Great Depression. I mean, the Fed created the Roaring '20s, the exuberance of credit, and then they sucked it all away. They just simply reduced the loans, and you can't cover the previous year's obligation of principal and interest. And when you can't do that, everything falls to shit. I think that's happening. It's not like a systemic collapse of Lehman Brothers, which you could see coming. You just didn't know the day that something like that was going to happen. But we're not really at that point. And they're already starting to do this. So they're playing their hand. They're telling you, we're not going to take the risk. So people need to pay attention. They need to be very, very careful. If other banks follow suit, everybody that's out there on the lam with mortgage payments that spread very thin, because a lot of people are debt rich, right? There's a lot of people living off credit, man. They're driving fancy cars, have fancy clothes, nice watches, but at the end of the day, they're 2-3 months away from being bankrupt. Unfortunately, that's the society we live in. And when you can't service your debt because you don't have access to the credit, well, you're going to lose that asset. The bank's going to get it back. And I think that's intentional. That's my thought.
So that's the big picture of the Wells Fargo freeze and how that ties into everything happening.
I believe so, because on a fractional system, when again you remove $1 billion, you're not just removing $1 billion, you're removing the fractional base of what it represents, which is 10 billion.
Got it.
And in much cases, much more. So when you hear numbers, like for example, the Fed took back in from quantitative easing or the loans to the financial banks. They took back in May of 2020. They took back like 400 and some billion dollars. Well, it's not just 400 and some billion dollars. It's actually like 4 trillion that they're taking out of the money system, because everything's based on a credit to the banking system, and then they lever that up. Kind of like in the mortgage market or any other credit market, you could have $100 million tranche of auto loans, student loans, corporate credit, mortgage debt, doesn't matter. That gets repackaged many times over, but it's the same crap. So when you have an effect of the base of those mortgage bonds or that tranche, just like when you reduce the money supply at the base level of, let's say, $1 billion or $400 billion, it magnify that. In many cases, this stuff goes out 10 times or higher. So if this continues to happen, we are putting money in the system, but we're starting to put that directly in the consumers. A lot of these stimulus is there's backdoor deals. Obviously, they're paying their buddies, and that sucks. But they're also trying to entitle people to win them over, get a vote, and pay them. So you're gonna, in my opinion, with the reduction of credit, anything supportive of credit, I think we're at a near collapse of it. Doesn't mean it gets completely eviscerated and it goes to zero, but a $1 million house could easily drop by 50% or more. It really could. So if you don't have the loans to, again, borrow Peter to pay Paul, or to build up the credit base for real estate or stocks, and these things are largely supported by that, you can't have access to that. If you run out of buyers, then things pull back. And then at the same time, on an inflation level, you're having payments go directly to consumers that get spent. That can increase velocity of money in an already inflationary monetary system. My guess is real estate stocks at some point from their highs, wherever that may be, this is the warning sign, they're going to come back. It's intentional. Bank wants the asset back. They want you to default. They want to get the house, the car, the boat, the business. That's their business model. Meanwhile, stimulus or UBI direct payments to an individual, that goes to the service end of consumption. That's where your gas prices go up. That's where your grocery bill goes up. That's where your sneakers go up. So you could easily see this massive deflationary system in that derived by credit, real estate stocks, and the like. And on the personal level of what it takes to live, you could be it in the short. So it's going to be interesting to see. I hope people are prepared, because if you're not, it's going to hurt.
Yeah, that's interesting. People normally think, well, it's either inflation or deflation. And if you manipulate the global economy for as long as they have, you can, as you're saying, you can basically have a warped thing where you could have massive inflation and massive deflation at the same time. But this leads into kind of this theme we've discussed, which is we're on the path that Voltaire talks about, which is that currencies eventually go back to their intrinsic value, which is zero, which brings in the conversation about central bank digital currencies and a replacement. I think Jerome Powell said just like today or yesterday, I saw a little clip when he was saying that once we have a digital dollar, you don't even need cryptocurrencies. We have a digital dollar. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was hilarious. And so, first of all, for everyone listening, if you're still with us, obviously Mark, super bright guy, got a lot to offer. So if you're looking for your gold and silver needs, the link to that is right there down below for First National Bullion, and to give Mark a call right there down below in the description. So where does central bank digital currencies, and most specifically the Bank of International Settlements, saying, the head of it saying they want absolute control over the monetary system. He personally said that. You've called him the most powerful person in the world. So how does all of this tie into CBDCs and what the BIS head said recently, which was, quote, we want absolute control?
Well, just looking at that bigger picture, again, I think Wells Fargo is the beginning of reducing the lending so you can't Ponzi it up. So you got to see it collapse. That then forces more direct payment to the consumer of a universal basic income, and you get on this slavery type nanny state. Where central bank digital currency comes in and the total control, that's the nail in the coffin. And if that truly does happen, and it looks like it's going, I mean, they're heavily invested. I don't see them backing down from this. If that truly goes, then we're all in trouble, because Augustine Cranston it was just released earlier this week. And Augustine Cranston, so for those that aren't aware, he is the head, he's the top guy at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. The Bank for International Settlements essentially is the central bank of the central bank. He holds what would be the equivalent of Jerome Powell's position for the Fed, but of the Bank for International Settlements. Why they are the central bank. Central bank essentially is they are the clearing firm for all processing and transactions internationally. So if the Federal Reserve does a transaction, a swap, a credit line with any other country, any other central bank, that transaction essentially is approved or denied in Basel, Switzerland, at the Bank of International Settlements, with Augustine Cranston having the end all say so. Literally, probably the most powerful man in the world when it comes to the monetary system. Jerome Powell would have to call him up and say, "Can I take a leak, sir? How many shakes do I get?" That's the type of guy he is. So when he says something, you bet your ass it's going to happen. And I'll reiterate just the comments I made before. I knew this was coming a while ago. As I mentioned, they were talking about digital currency all the way back since 2008, talking about how they can get away with negative yield, and they can do that. If you can't take a dollar out, then you don't cheat them the 5 cents they owe on negative yield. So we knew that. And in July of 2019, in a lecture in Ireland, Augustine Cranston stated, the goal is by 2025 to remove all physical paper, banknotes, or currency and go to what is CBDC coin to credit or debit its value. Now we're hearing more statements from them as of just this recent week. It's to control the monetary system. So listen to the language, people, of what the most powerful people in the world are saying. They want to control you in a digital system. And if you look at China as an example, because they've already rolled out theirs, in a digital system, you can, one, dictate what that product is good for. So a CBDC coin to you based upon your social credit score or where you stand in society or what level of job you have, who knows, you may not be able to do anything other than buy essentials. Not able to go to the store, get sneakers. Maybe you don't get t-shirts. Maybe you can't have internet access for that day. There's all kinds of things that can happen in this control, but also just as importantly is we're finding out that you can put an expiration on it. So when you put everybody in a position where they need a government handout simply because markets have crumbled and jobs were closed down for many, many months due to this pandemic, many of them just haven't opened back up or to full capacity or even opened up, you can control a population. You can make them do things that they otherwise may not want to do. That is entirely what this is about. And it should scare the hell out of you. It scares the hell out of me. And you're already seeing test markets in China where it's working. If you get a paycheck, let's say you would have got to your paycheck in central bank digital coin beginning of January 1st. What if there's an expiration on that August 1st? So you get $1,000 a month. You can't save it, right? So if you don't have savings, you must then speculate, if allowed, to try to grow your wealth or survive. So just really get your head around that and think about the implications, because it's not a good thing. And you got this guy coming out now saying they want total control, as opposed to in July of 2019, there was no mention of total control. It was mentioned of central bank digital currency to credit interest earned or debit interest taken on a negative yield, the system. But now we're seeing the true intentions. So it's not good. I don't like it. As far as Powell saying, with the digital dollar, you don't need Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin stands. I think cryptocurrencies stand, whether you believe in them or not. I have some. I consider them my lotto ticket. I'm not 100% sold that it's the end all be all for money, but I do believe money finds homes. And when people scramble trying to protect wealth or panic, they run into markets and that bids things up. So if that market runs, I want to be a part of it, hands down. Do I think that it's going to supersede central bank digital currency? I don't know.
What's amazing to me is just when you understand that this individual is the head of the Bank of International Settlements, and then you have the context that you gave, which is basically he's the head of all central banks. He's the power mover of the financial system.
Yeah.
And you hear that he actually said the words absolute control.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you think about it like one organized system, So then you think like his executive assistant is Jerome Powell and all these other types of folks, Christine Lagarde, all these folks, they're his executive assistants. Well, his executive assistants are going on press conferences saying they need central bank digital currency while he
Hmm.
simultaneously says we need absolute control.
Yeah.
It's like, it's pretty funny. I mean,
Yeah. And you got to follow what they say and follow the narrative. And then also, you had Yellen come out last week, I believe, and she was like, okay, we'll let inflation go about 2.5%. Inflation's a good thing for the economy. No, it's not. It's stealing your wealth. And inflation's at 2%. You make 100 grand, you lost 2 grand. I mean, that's a big chunk, especially after most people lose 40 to 50 cents on every single dollar they make. So they're trying to create some sort of narrative because that's really all they can do. That's why FDIC was risen to a 250,000 instead of 100,000 after 2008. And that's why in March of 2020, you had a bunch of media attention for the regional central bank CEOs or heads of those divisions on Dateline, things like that, 60 Minutes, talking about, hey, everything's fine. So they're simply trying to keep control of a narrative because the only thing that they can do to expand or contract credit is issue more loans, recall loans in, i.e., contraction. Wells Fargo stop the credit lines, or they can raise or drop interest rates. Well, we're at a point that if you look since stimulus started in 2008 and rates went to zero, we tried to raise interest rates in 2019. What did it do? It crushed us. We tried to raise them in 2014 and 15. What did it do? It crushed us. There was talk of just 2 weeks ago, I think maybe 3 weeks ago, Powell was saying, okay, yeah, give it a little bit of time. We're going to start tapering in. Look what happened to the markets. Everybody freaked out. So there's nothing you can do. You raise rates, you crush it. I think Wells Fargo again is the beginning of a systematical takedown of the markets and those derived of credit, much like you had in the Great Depression. So they created the Roaring Twenties in the Great Depression to get us off the gold standard in 33 and change us to a paper unbacked debt-based system entirely with no gold reserves. It just had the international exchange, which we lost that peg in 71. Well, look at what they're talking about now. Okay, same play, different point in time. We're going from a physical banknote to a central bank digital system. How do you get your wish? Is you collapse the system. Look at it. They stopped lending in the 20s to create the Great Depression, said we didn't see it coming. Bullshit. You created it, you made it, business plan. Same thing all over again. Problem is people don't understand the history and they don't trust it. In our position, we're here to help you. If you choose to reach out to us, a lot of people have, and I'm happy to help. 4 stores, 2 states, 2-way markets, international access and depositories. And I tell you what, gold and silver throughout all recorded history is really the only monetary unit that has ever survived or kept anybody alive through a massive, massive currency event. And that's what we're doing. So take heed, give me a call. I mean, I'd love to help you. If you don't have a good portion of your portfolio in it, I don't know, good luck. It's all a speculation outside of that. And if debt continues to contract, you can see Dow, even if it goes up another 10,000, you can see that sucker drop like a rock. And it would happen in a day to a week. So fast, you wouldn't even know what day of the week it is and your head spins. And by that time, people rushing into, look back to the first video when you first brought me on of our conversations of precious metals becoming hard to get, if not impossible to get. That's happening. Premiums are still elevated. Some mints to make fresh rounds or bars and silver is concerned. I'm getting dated out to October, even though I do have supply, but I have supply because of orders I placed back in late April and May. Those are starting to come in. At some point, that stops too.
if there's another round of attempted lockdowns like we're already seeing in Australia and numerous other places, if that happens to Canada and America, what would do you believe that the mints would shut down again? Obviously one of the issues became that everything got stopped up and shut down, and that really affected the supply and demand fundamentals for gold bullion and silver bullion, which obviously is already distorted by the derivative paper market. So how would lockdowns, if there's an attempted new wave by the Biden administration, how would this affect gold and silver?
Well, just like you said initially, if there is a lockdown, you're going to have reduced capacity of mining, reduced capacity of logistics, reduced capacity of minting. So therefore, supply is going to drop, but demand is relatively going to stay the same to go higher. Also, the other aspect is if we do see another lockdown, people are wising up. They really are. I think a lot of people out there are thinking, okay, we're calling shenanigans. Very few people that I speak to, even though there's still a great amount of them, I think that these are even worthwhile. I think anybody with half common sense realizes that it just doesn't make sense anymore. But if we go into another lockdown, I think demand will actually pick up.
Because really the fear will pick up, right?
Exactly. And that's the part of the lockdowns and the central bank digital coin and the pulling the money out of the system. It's all a systematic plan to make your asset that of a financier, because if you don't have access to credit, you can't roll over your debt. You can't make your mortgage payments, especially if you're living off credit. You become more dependent. The house that you had for 5 years, 2 months, whatever it is, maybe you couldn't afford it. Maybe you got a job, maybe you lose the job. Now you really can't afford it. Who gets that house? Well, the person that lent it to you. All right, you're left out on the street. Then you got this digital central bank digital coin, the digital aspect that control what you can do, what you can't, coupled with lockdowns. What the fuck, man? I mean, your resources and access to survival at best are limited. And then your resource or access to God's money, actual gold and silver, it damn near disappears. So what are you going to do when that happens? Right? What are people going to do, especially when they come in and they're like, yeah, I'll buy 100 ounces of silver and see what happens. Okay, how much your net worth? I got about $1 million. All right, you're toast. Especially if that stuff's in the market and annuities and all this stuff and net present value, where you got to get a certain interest rate to pay out the annuity or the pension, and it's all built upon debt, which is levered up hundreds of times in some instances, and you can see them pulling the plug. How does that look?
What's the next cards on the table?
What, for me or for them or for you?
For all of the above. What's the next cards on the table as we move through the rest of 2021?
Be alert. Read as much as you can. Decipher as much as you can. Be very defensive, aggressively defensive about what you've earned your entire life and what the rest of your life is going to look like. Me personally, I still buy precious metals. I've been buying precious metals for a long time. I don't think I'm going to stop until I just simply cannot get it. Precious metals is the biggest portion of my portfolio. I'm way above what I recommend for most individuals, which is about 30%. So that's that. You need to first build that position. Dry powder is something that's to be said. Until they remove cash, you maybe want to have some cash on the side for opportunities. You can still make a buck with speculation, but again, it's a risk. Be willing to lose it. Cash out of the banking system is pretty key too. Gives you a little bit of autonomy, and that's what Augustine Cranston was saying in his lecture here recently. The comments were, they don't know who's using the $100 bill or the $1,000 peso, and they don't have really any control over it. So they want total control. If you can have currency out of the banking system, then you have a little bit of flexibility until you don't have that anymore. I like that. Other than that, make sure that you have, for all those that carry a lot of debt in debt service, whether it's generating cash flow or not. If it's generating cash flow, that's fine, but that's only as good as your tenants or the ability to be paid to cover your obligations. And at some point, the rent or mortgage forbearance, all these things that they put in effect, at some point they pull that too, because the name of the game is more for us, less for you, screw you. So that's coming. Make sure that people out there, they have to have at least enough in the till to cover them through hard times. or be prepared to lose assets. If you think you're not going to, then maybe be a little on the offense and liquidate some assets and raise some cash. These are things you can do while you still have the opportunity of choice to do them. If we go into lockdowns and we fully hit CBDC coin, which I believe the US Fed CBDC will be introduced, I believe, within 3 to 6 months.
If they do another round of lockdowns, it seems like purely from the practicality standpoint of their goals to give people money, that the CBDC is in their best interest, because they'll be able to see what people are spending their stimulus money on to as they gather more data. So it does seem like it makes sense based off of the patterns that they are doing here.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the whole thing is gauge where the money goes, where the money doesn't go. Right? Corporate industries, maybe they get more than you by being able to dictate how long that CBDC or your stimulus or universal basic income is effectively there. That reduces all savings aspect. You're now reliant on a government. But more importantly is look at the shenanigans, as we touched on inflation and how they mark that and how they mark on GDP and then our money supply. You got M1, used to have M2 or M2 still there, but they don't update it. It's now other data series points, and M3 was just shit canned back in 2005 because it came too inconveniently exposed of where inflation was at about 10% back then. So understanding complex systems is hard enough, but in a digital framework, because I mean, I'm not a rocket scientist. I mean, I'm not a computer geek. How do you ever gauge what they're really doing? What really is the monetary supply? Where's the inflation coming from? Who's putting it out there? And they can put out more than they're saying. So it's a very, very bad thing. And it seems like governments are all behind it. The 3.5 trillion infrastructure stimulus, I mean, that's on the back of what we've already seen since lockdowns in March, which is just ungodly amount. The Fed's balance sheet has gone from 800 billion in 2008 to 10x that 13 years later. These are not good signs, and it's actually historically accurate with the fall of an empire. You always squeeze the most abundance blood from the stone, and you get the biggest overreach when you know you're going down. So if the
that's
central
what it
bank,
seems like to me.
Yeah, it is like they're rushing to accomplish as much as they possibly can before all hell breaks loose, right? Because it's not necessarily entirely in their control. Everything's levered up so much, and then you have these overnight lending markets, which banks actually, when they get a margin call or their reserve requirements go below a certain line at the end of the night and they go into a close, if they don't get something in the coffers, if they don't get something to build them back up from dusk till dawn, since markets trade basically 24 hours internationally, they're going to be beaten like a redheaded stepchild. Right. And they're going to wake up broke. So banks will borrow money from other institutions overnight at a set fixed rate. In September of 2019, that rate was nearly 2.5%, and it shot up from one day to the next to 10%. That signals distrust. And that was coming up on 2 years ago. Okay. So distrust, meaning that if I need, now these are exaggerated numbers, but I'm going to use them just to kind of easy math. Let's say I'm bank A and you're bank B, and I'm going into the close of the market and I'm below reserve requirements. Essentially, I get a margin call, but I can't afford that margin call because I don't have any cash on the side to actually do it. And I'm levered up 10, 20, 100 times. I'm going to call you up, bank B, and I'm going to say, yo, I need 20 billion, 10 billion. All right. We'll say I need 10 billion. And you'll say, okay, I'll give you the 10 billion. What do you got? And I have AAA debt, treasury, stuff like that. I would then transfer to you my treasuries as collateral for the 10 billion to cover me overnight. So my reserve requirements are whole. In the morning, when we wake up, I survived. I wasn't picked on by shorts coming from overseas. So I'm still alive. I'm going to pay you back your 10 billion at a rate, which was typically close to what the Fed funds rate was of about 2.5. Well, guess what? That shit went to 10. So if I'm borrowing 10 billion from you and I need to pay back, 11 billion, I probably didn't need the money in the first place. So what you're telling me, Bank B, Jake Ducey, is that you don't trust what's in my portfolio, right? You do not want to go to bed with me because you don't think you're going to go wake up. And if I'm dumb enough to take the money, here's the money. That's what that means. When banks distrust each other and they don't even want to lend their buddies money, and that happened in 2019, the world starts to fall to shit. That also happened in 2008. They had to close money markets because so much capital was leaving the system from bank A to bank B on international exchange that systemically everything could have fallen apart. And that was what, 12, 13 years ago? So there definitely is this accentuated rush to squeeze everything you possibly can for them. Tell us everything's okay. But yeah, it's not. And if you're not paying attention to it, before you know it, it changes and you're left holding the bag and possibly nothing in your 401k either.
Yeah, when I saw the 3.5 trillion, I was like, that is such a big number. And we already know, I mean, all of it's fraud. I mean, couple percent will go to people and the rest is it'll be sent all over the world. Most of it'll be sent outside of America. It'll go to every politician's, whoever, they need to, whoever's, their caretaker. And so I saw that number and I was like, knowing that 90% of it is fraud, it's going to special interest. I was like, it's such a big number. It felt to me like it signaled fear from them. Like they were trying to disperse as much money to the special interests as possible. And then when I hear Jerome Powell, I did a video the other day where I took his clips chronologically since the lockdown, saying inflation's a joke, nothing's going to happen. It may come here in a little to, it's going to be here, but it's not even big and it'll be gone like by tomorrow, to, yeah, it's here and it's going to be here to a while. Now we had Bernie Sanders. Did you see that yesterday? Bernie Sanders said that inflation is a real concern. Bernie Sanders yesterday, he's like, yeah, this is actually a pretty big concern. It looks incredibly obvious to me that they're very panicked. And so, one, that's something interesting to watch. Two, it's interesting you picked up on the same thing. And three, I guess the open-ended question is, what happens next?
That's the $1 million question. No one has that crystal ball. All you can do is take the information you're given, decipher it accurately, put it in a historical view, and then figure like, okay, damn, I get it. At least to get it to a point, this is where I need to call to action. Again, going back to precious metals historically have always risen to meet the devalued currency base. So if you look at usdeclock.org, which does the heavy lifting for you of our US monetary supply, which is bogus, it doesn't even tell us how bad it is. You got silver pricing at nearly $4,000. I think you got gold well over $10,000. So I'm not saying that that's where they're going to go, but I'm saying historically that happens. And when you see this desperation, I mean, they're trying to pay off their buddies. They're trying to cover the backdoor margin. They're trying to cover as many asset acquisitions as they possibly can because they know the transfer is coming. So September of 2019, when repo went to shit and rates went from 2.5% to 10%, and then the Fed had to come in with $75 billion that day to cover the margin, and they did that, and that jumped up to $1 trillion. And then by March of 2020, you had in excess of about $3 trillion being produced by the Fed just to cover the backstop of margin. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And if you taper that or you pull back, everything falls apart. We've seen that. We saw that in 2000, the attempts in 2013, 14, 2015, 2019. And we heard just the jawboning 2 weeks ago from Jerome Powell. Anytime they mention taper, anytime they mention taking the foot off the gas, because you have a Ponzi scheme debt-based system. Going back to Wells Fargo, when they pull it out intentionally, well, they're telling you right now, they don't want to take the risk. They know what's coming, so they're going to protect themselves and just not lend to you. You're screwed. We got the money. When you see this happen in the exuberance of all the aggression of stimulus, I mean, it's not a good thing, and we're not going to stop here. And the problem is now the stimulus, it isn't just going to backstop the banks or the corporations like AIG, Motor City. It's going directly to the consumers, right? And people are going to love it because they're going to say, okay, I'm broke and I get my $4,000 a month, so good for me. But when it goes directly to the consumers, that's where inflation really kicks in, because you've bypassed that trickle down type system of loans coming from the top down to the bottom, creating wealth and spending. People go out and spend, and so again, I think you're going to have a massive pullback in anything in the credit markets, especially real estate, especially stocks. There was a place, where I'm at in my neighborhood. It was a townhouse, and I mean, it's going for like $900K. I mean, just absolutely insane. It has no reason to be there. I see people buying this stuff, and they're buying it, on credit, and it's like a starter house, and they're a young family, and unfortunately, they don't know what's going on, so they're going to get screwed, especially if they lose their job. So all these things are going to have to come back because the bank wants to reclaim the asset. They're going to give stimulus directly to the consumer. That goes to the service end. So gas goes up, bell peppers, bananas, car tires, all this stuff starts to go up. So you got this very interesting point in time, but yet gold and silver historically maintains wealth and purchasing power in a volatile system through both deflation and inflation. And you're going to have a mixture of both. But if we have another shutdown, again, you're not going to be able to get the metal because everybody's going to want it. Supplies chain is going to be broken, and it's just not going to happen. And then you go to a central bank digital coin where you're screwed. You're dictated to what they're going to do. So this is all in line, and they've been telling us this for a while. After 2008, they started talking about the negative yield, started talking about digital units. Augustine Krantz in 2019. The Fed meeting in Jackson Hole 2019, going direct reset, direct to the consumer, bypass the government. All this starts to make sense. So when the highest authority in the world of the monetary system, Augustine Krantz, says, we want control, bet your ass they do. So if they have control, do you have any? If they have total control, do you have any control? Yes, no? No. So why not make defensive moves and know what's coming before the music stops? Because look, they shut us down. We've been shut down since March of last year. That's the last time you really were free. Hang on to a vaccination card because it's your ticket or passport to freedom. And now you're starting to see states either accept or deny other countries. You're going to have a QR code just to go out. If you want your paycheck, you're going to have the QR code just to get your stimulus or your paycheck. No jab, no pay. So tie all this together, complete control, right? Complete control. So in a digital system, controlling your movement because you got to eat, if you don't have something to work with, you are screwed. It's plain and simple. And it needs to be a big enough portion that you can direct some of that when gold and silver meet the devaluation of currency and system, as they've done historically, and a changing of the guard of the currency system. So you can go pick up burnt real estate stocks on the cheap. You can get the $2 million fourplex that goes to $500,000 just to watch it go back to $5 million. But if you don't have something to work with, you're done. And then you need to retain a portion of your precious metals position for the great can kids you don't know, because total control is just that. It's total control. With enough wealth or something to work with, you can possibly buy your way in or out of something. If not, you're dependent. That is what this all means, Jake. Total control is total control. And I think CBDC coin, because Powell said is coming in 6 months to a year. He said that about a month and a half, 2 months ago. So I think you're going to start to see the CBDC coin come out within about 3 to 6 months. Currency is not going to be removed immediately. My guess is probably in about 2 to 3 years for that entirely. But they reduced lending to collapse the market in the Great Depression to force us off the gold-backed system to go to a fiat-based system. Now you see Wells Fargo reduce lending, i.e., look at the historical precedents of this. They were reducing less lending to bring down debt-related assets and force us onto a digital system and remove currency. It's the same story, just different day and time. It just looks a lot different. That's it.
So we got Mark Gonzalez here. If you enjoyed today's conversation, right there down below is a link to First National Bullion. you on the website can give Mark a call. We'll also link Mark's number right there down below. Go ahead, give Mark a call right now at First National Bullion for gold and silver. Make sure you hit the like button on this video to send it out into the YouTube universe so more people see it. Give us a comment down below and let us know what you think of today's episode. Comment down below. Get prepared now. And if you haven't yet, make sure you hit the bell notification and all that fun stuff to get notified for future videos. We'll link right there down below for you to get in touch with Mark. And Mark, thank you.